morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us for the second installment of our pilot project got renewed, which is good. So we're back in this in the auditorium here in this format. So I'm happy to see that I didn't mess it up too bad the last time. So at least we got this second episode approved to be back in here. But I wanted to take, I think we may have a couple people coming in yet, but I think we're going to get started recognizing the time. But appreciate having you here today. We're going to talk about leveraging our rail and port assets for economic development and growth in the county. I think all of you have probably heard me talk about what I think are the really unique competitive assets that we have here within Ashtabula County. Deep water ports, we have 2 Class 1 railroads running through. We've got more spurs and rail infrastructure along with our county airport, and leveraging those in combination to maximize economic opportunity is one of the primary goals, if not the primary goal that we're focused on, because we think, at least from my perspective, that's a huge competitive advantage. So I'm happy to have our guest here today, Patrick Aniter with CPCS Consulting, based out of Ontario, Canada?
CPCS is based out of Ottawa.
Out of Ottawa.
But I'm in Cincinnati.
All right, so he's a local Ohio guy. So
I grew up in Western Pennsylvania.
All right, we won't hold that against you. Just don't mention, well, there's probably a divided audience in here between Steelers and the Browns. I just, I want to point out quickly, because I've never been able to do this before, the Browns' record is better than the Steelers. It's early in the season, right? I need to take advantage of that because the likelihood that stays in place is, I don't know, it might be a little bit iffy, but I'll take that.
I'm very glad you beat Baltimore.
Right. So we're happy to have Patrick here with us this morning. And I'll read a little bit of his background here. So he's has over 24 years of experience in multimodal transportation planning and policy analysis, including expertise in freight, transit, land use, and public-private partnerships. He has provided strategic guidance to clients in 12 different states for the U.S. Department of Transportation and for the Transportation Research Board. And I should add, I think you're doing some work for you, how rail...
Ohio Rail Development
Commission. Thank you. And then before joining CPCS, Patrick was a national transportation planning lead with a major planning and engineering firm. So let's welcome Patrick to Ashtabula County. So I think with that, Patrick, why don't you give us a little bit of background? I gave a little intro into CPCS, but I think it's probably appropriate for everyone here. The thing that I love is that a lot of times, when we're doing development work, we tend to kind of look within our smaller borders. But I'm excited to have you here and representing CPCS because you have the experience of doing projects not just nationally across the U.S., but worldwide. So would love to hear a little bit more about your firm and what you're seeing nationally.
Yeah, and I'll just give a brief primer on just national trends related to freight, and then kind of drill down to Ohio, and then maybe what the implications might be here for Ashtabula County. So as far as CPCS goes, we have 3 focus areas: transport, public-private partnerships, and power. We're actually relatively new to the U.S. As Greg had said, we're based in Ottawa, Ontario. We are actually spun off from the Canadian Pacific Railroad. That's the CP and CS, Canadian Pacific Consulting Services, and back in the mid-'80s, and now it's a standalone employee-owned company. And we do a lot of international work. As I said, we're about 4 years here in the U.S., but most of our work is in developing countries. Actually, we do a lot of power and public-private partnerships in Africa. But here in the U.S., there's about 12 of us now, and we're scattered all over the place. I work out of my house in Cincinnati. We have a guy in Duluth, Minnesota, Chicago, Madison, Wisconsin, but we have a core of about 5 or 6 folks in Washington, D.C., which is where my boss sits. So I have to mention that. So This, I'm not going to go over all this, but it's basically kind of the spectrum of what trends affect freight. It's pretty much everything. Just going around, we put it in different buckets, whether it be political, social, economic, technological, environmental. There are so many factors that go into freight, not just because it's basically the engine of every economy. If anything that didn't walk itself in this room was freight at one time. So you can see, that cup and that projector at one point was freight. So there's a lot that goes into the raw materials manufacturing, moving everything. An automobile, for example, we're helping out on the Texas Border Master Plan on the freight component of it, and an automobile moves across the border about between 6 and 8 times before it's finished. Parts just move back and forth for a value added on one side of the border or the other. So as far as freight transportation goes, this is it's the spectrum. So it goes from your high volume, low value on the marine side of things up to your high value, low volume. So whenever you're talking about marine and railroad, which is going to be sort of the main topic of our talk today, transit time is less important. More important is cost. Whereas on the other end of the spectrum, logistics costs are less important because it's very important that I get what it is I need there very, very quickly on the air side of things.
So, Patrick, if I could interrupt or interject really quickly. So logistics, meaning the movement of raw materials and finished goods, plays a huge role in the success of existing businesses and their growth, but it also affects the ability to attract new businesses into the area. Do you see, and this is a general question, you can apply it to different industries that might be more relevant for us here in Ashtabula County, any general trends or changes that are happening within freight movements that are interesting or intriguing or unique, that are happening globally or even across the U.S. that might be interesting for us to pay attention to?
Well, obviously, environmental concerns are coming up more and more, whether or not you're in the U.S., whether you're in Europe, or even if you're in Africa. So, obviously, we can talk about autonomous trucks and truck platooning, and we'll talk a little bit about precision railroading. There are general trends that haven't shaken out yet, but once they do, it might be a game changer. I'm sure you may have heard about Hyperloop in the Columbus area. Putting these pods together and putting freight on it and shooting it through a tube at 1,000,000 miles an hour. That's a very, very high cost to develop that infrastructure. If it works, it's kind of like a game changer. It's kind of like containerization back in the 70s, where once the standardized container was boarded on a ship, it just changed everything.
Do you, I'm getting a little off the rails
anybody
here,
can ask questions.
but do you see, so we have a lot of traditional historic infrastructure that was developed out of the Industrial Revolution, right. Rail, port assets, and other things, highway development. Do you see a reuse or repurposing of those in creative ways?
I do.
Globally? Sorry, I didn't mean to get too far.
That's okay. Let me move ahead here. We have some fun little maps. So, this is county business patterns in Ashtabula County. These are freight-related businesses that are over 10 employees. And you can see, to Greg's point, that they center around the freight transportation assets. And this is due to historic development patterns. This is I don't want to say this is unique to Ashtabula County, but it is very, very important that these sort of patterns exist and remain, especially if you want to utilize the freight transportation assets that you have now. Some of the infrastructure is very, very good. Your CSX and your NS line have good service. I'm not necessarily for the county itself, but there's a lot of freight going on that, and it is something that can be tapped into. Obviously, your major interstates, the I-90 corridor is big, as well as the Route 6 is also pretty important for the region itself. And you have pockets of historic industrial use as well in manufacturing. These are important to locate, to foster. And whenever we go into a place, we look for bolstering up the existing businesses prior to trying to attract others. So you don't want the businesses that you have in your region to leave before you can, start to develop others. And you have a critical mass of very good manufacturing base in Ashtabula County historically. Now, employment has been decreasing, as everybody knows in the county, but the base is still there. So I'm not sure if that answered your question, but based on the historic patterns of the county, I think you have something to build on for sure.
And just to clarify, so employment's not, the labor pool's declining,
The labor
right?
pool,
Employment has been growing,
Right, I'm
and
sorry.
employment's strong, but the overall labor pool, along with our population, has been declining. And that's another sort of infrastructure resource topic for another day. But you'd mentioned something, precision scheduled railroading, and I think that plays into how to leverage these assets. Can you talk about, for those in the audience that don't know what precision scheduled railroading is, and how that impacts us in terms of the strategy that we use? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so precision scheduled railroading is a new operational model being adopted by the Class 1 railroads right now. And what it is basically utilizing the capacity that they have on their lines more efficiently, sort of like a hub and spoke model, where they're building longer trains going longer distances in order to get more efficiency out of the system. So with that being said, there's, again, we're talking about 200, 250, even 300 car trains here, and they're massive. You have two major Class 1 rail lines coming through the county. Obviously, it's going to impact both. It could impact positive as well as negatively. On the positive side of things, if there's a strong manufacturing base that utilizes the rail system itself, where blocks of rail cars can be built, they can just be picked up, kind of like an Uber. You're just driving by, switch them onto the back, and take them off to Chicago, take them to the northeast ports, to Port of New York, New Jersey, take them even further to Port LA, Long Beach, transfer someplace in St. Louis. That's the plus side of things, is that you have this, as long as the switching is efficient, then it's an asset for rail shippers.
Right.
On the negative side of things, you have grade crossings, and those grade crossings are likely to be blocked for longer durations of time, and therefore your roadway system would be affected.
Right. So just to build on that, to kind of give a visual, so the way that precision railroading is starting to change things nationally is that hub and spoke is a really good example. Right now, the Class 1s want to connect to major centers, right? So they want to connect to, using an airport example, they want to connect from Atlanta to Chicago, and they want to run straight there with as few stops between that route as possible. But they will stop if there's value to do that, in terms of there's enough car mass to pick up. And you have to have then the infrastructure to support that stop. The one thing that we have here is both NS and CSX have large-scale rail yards here within the county, Norfolk Southern's in Conneaut, and CSX in Ashtabula. So if we have the mass and the opportunity to build large enough blocks of freight traffic, rail traffic, we can potentially encourage opportunities to connect into that system where other communities might not. What questions?
Yeah, well, comment.
Yeah.
What we see as a railroad, the short line railroad in Jefferson, is that the precision railroading model has meant, I should let the gentleman who's the boss.
Our service is much better.
Yes.
With Norfolk Southern's plan, precision scale railroading, is to keep their yards free of cars. So when cars arrive, within the day, they're out to the industries.
Right.
And to
And
us.
actually 7 days a week.
Right.
Where it used to be, you switch once or twice.
Right. So for those of you that don't know, Mr. Escalante, they operate AC&J Railroad, which is a short line operator. Don't let me steal your thunder. Whatever I screw up, you say, whoa, wait a second.
It makes a
This is mine. You
difference
got it.
to our company.
So the importance of that is that when you get into those local moves, the big class ones don't want to handle those local moves anymore, right? So you need partners like AC&J to, when they come into the system, and they call it in the railroading industry first mile, last mile, either to pick up from a manufacturer and move that into the system, or vice versa, take it out of the system, meaning that long stretch, and put it back into a local manufacturing company. You need partners to do that because the class ones want to hand that off at this point. Is that fair to say?
That is correct.
Right. And that's critical, because I think you have to build those resources then to be able to compete and leverage the infrastructure assets that we have here. It's one thing to have the resources here, but it's another thing to have the ability to function on those resources. And I think what we have here is the capability to do that.
Yeah, and to add on that, the first mile, last mile is extremely important, especially for rail customers, because of labor rules for class ones. Oftentimes, a rail car might be sitting a block away from where it's supposed to be, and they have to wait for a CSX crew or NS crew to deliver that car. And if the recipient goes onto the property, they're trespassing and they can't get their car, but they can see it right there and they need the parts that's in it. So having local partners to help do that first mile, last mile, and deliver those vehicles off of the Class 1 system is critical.
And also to transfer, so that if I'm a company and I don't have rail right to my plant, I can go to a transloader and unload and put it into a truck.
Exactly. Yeah. And
So I actually, I'm a little suspicious now. I left my questions down here, and I think somebody peeked at them. So my question was about transloading, and for those that don't know what transloading is, I think it's a huge opportunity. So it really is the integration of multi-modes, whether that's taking a truck and tying that truck into moving it from truck onto rail, or from rail back onto truck, or even waterborne freight onto rail and onto truck. It's leveraging the ability to move that multimodal. And for us, I think a good example, and I'll give an example, and I think AC&J is servicing this, but we have local companies that are bringing in raw materials, polyethylene pellets for the production of plastics products, that are brought in by rail, if I'm not mistaken, brought in by rail, because that's the most efficient mode for that raw material. It's then put on truck and truck to their facility. Another one is large-scale paper, right? So think about whether it's rolls of steel where you see them on the back of trucks, or large rolls of paper. It's much more efficient to put those onto particularly a rail or a waterborne freight opportunity to the extent that you can. And I think those are two examples of where we're utilizing transloading here to the benefit of local manufacturers. I think, Mark, you had a question.
Can you talk a little bit about maybe the current opportunities in both Conneaut and Ashtabula, because of the two different rail lines that have the capacity? What capacity are we at? Are we at capacity? Or we just say, listen, we've aggregated enough product, or aggregated enough cars where that makes it feasible to do it? We need to add 10 more cars a week, 100 more cars a month. I mean, how many more cars do we have to add to make that efficient for us to utilize those two locations?
Well, I think, Patrick, that was, you guys have done some market research here, but I think the answer to that question varies a little bit. If you're talking about motivating the class ones to be involved, we've got a ways to go, right? Meaning that they'll get involved in sort of taking certain volumes, but they won't get involved in making that first mile, last mile move. Where we have somebody like an AC&J, they're very motivated by certain volumes that we have in different markets. When I say different markets, meaning Pontiac versus Ashtabula versus Geneva versus South County, and the connectivity to those markets. So I think there's opportunity there, but the job is getting our local companies to understand where there's value in changing their logistics approaches and where we can integrate them into the system a little bit more efficiently. And it's then building those relationships as they move up the ladder with connecting into the larger, whether it's the NS system, the CSX system, or even with our ports, in looking at opportunities to move different commodities through there. So.
You answered Mark, excuse me. There's a block, NS brings a block to Pontiac every day that's dropped in volumes for this county and also in Northwest Pennsylvania. And I think CSX is doing the same thing in Ashtabula.
Right. And I apologize. I've really taken us off track, Patrick. So you're gonna
No, this
but
isn't.
I think the one thing that Bob just made a comment around, it's a movement that goes into Pennsylvania, right? We're not geographically limited. There's not a wall on the state border there that limits our ability to connect into larger marketplaces. And our infrastructure connects very well, not just within the county, but within the tri-state region. So when I say tri-state region, I mean into Pennsylvania, into West Virginia, into even into Kentucky, and as you head west into Indiana and Illinois. So, you know, what is that, the Quad State region?
There's 5 or 6 there.
Right. And so I think it's critical for us as we think strategically around this, we're not limiting ourselves to our thinking about what's happening here locally, but how do we connect to the larger market. So those are some of the things that we're looking at, and that Patrick's group is helping us try to understand a little better.
Yeah, so I guess the idea is the blocks of cars and what the critical mass is. And you have that here, obviously, otherwise NS wouldn't be, dropping off blocks of cars. So the service is good. I agree with Greg that you have to bring the Class 1s along a little bit more. But I don't think you're hampered by capacity right now, especially since the decline in coal volumes. Now you have a lot of excess capacity in the system.
Sorry, I'll let you get back to it.
No worries. I don't even know where we were, to tell you the truth. I kind of like this format.
Well, if you want, I can go to another question.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
So
I'll just
the
use
question
it.
that you would actually send to me, and I'm interested because I've never heard this terminology. So you had the question he raises, what is blue accounting, and why should Ashtabula County care? I'm interested because I'm going to learn something.
Has anybody ever heard of blue accounting? So this is a program that was started in 2013 by the Great Lakes Council of Governors and Premiers. So what it is it's taking into consideration a lot of different metrics in order to build a case for new port infrastructure. And it includes performance metrics, it includes environmental targets, performance metrics in terms of service, as well as in terms of operations, how efficiently ports can operate. And it's being led by the council as well as the Nature Conservancy. So you can see the partnership there is both on the operations side as well as the environmental side, as well as across the border between the U.S. and Canada. It includes the St. Lawrence Seaway and all of the Great Lakes states. So blue accounting itself is sort of a system of metrics as opposed to, and what it does is it helps states, port authorities, and provinces build a case for port-related improvements, both for environmental improvements as well as operational improvements. Why should Ashtabula County care? Well, because you can build your case for port improvements. And Ohio is a member of the council itself. So So looking into those metrics, incorporating those metrics into your plans for the ports themselves gives you a leg up on possible funding opportunities.
Great. That's a good segue into the maritime component of the discussion. So we have two deep water ports. And deep water ports meaning they're drafted or dredged to 30 feet deep, so they can handle a fully loaded freighter and handle the ability to bring them in without hitting bottom. So that's extremely critical that those resources, again, were built here in Conneaut and in Ashtabula and leveraging those. So traditionally, the movements out of our ports have been bulk material, iron ore, coal, aggregates, like limestone, those types of products, salt, and those, particularly on the coal side, have disappeared. The iron ore components of that have gone down, but we're still doing, from a volume perspective, I'm going to give you ranges here, but somewhere in the 5 to 6 million tons a year out of both Conneaut. I mean, Conneaut's a little higher than Ashtabula in terms of tonnage, but my question is for Patrick, are you seeing other areas or opportunities to leverage ports, deep water ports, to move different types of commodities or to diversify that basin? And are there any examples that are applicable for Ashtabula County?
Yep, and right behind you is the system is evolving, as Greg had mentioned. You know, the reduction in coal and iron ore provides excess capacity for ports itself. And you can see the trend line, and this is, I believe this is all of the Great Lakes, and not just Ohio or the two ports in Ashtabula County. But we do see the growing sectors being project cargo, so this is like for pipelines, for drilling and shale drilling, even frac sand. Those are sort of project cargo related items. Chemicals, plastics, as you mentioned, plastic pellets, and petrochemicals. So yeah, those are growing sectors within the Great Lakes region itself. So that is something that Ashtabula ports could tap into. I have this too. You guys, I'm not even sure if you've seen this. These are port volumes back in 2015. The ports here are very respectable. If you put the Ashtabula County ports in one lump, it's almost as big as Toledo, and Toledo is a pretty big port. So you're pushing quite a bit of stuff through here. One of the issues associated with this, and you know, this is part of the, you know, what are some of the strengths and what are some of the weaknesses of the county itself, is that your ports are operated by private companies, and they have a vested interest in pushing through the cargo that they need in order to conduct their businesses. So it's not an open forum for if Greg wanted, you know, a truckload of fertilizer, you know, he can't go to the port and pick it up or have it come into the port. You know, Kinder Morgan likes to move what they move, and so you're sort of stuck to those commodities. You can see that in this slide, this is the port traffic by commodity for both of the terminals. Ashtabula is more diversified than Conneaut. You know, Conneaut, basically, iron ore is their bread and butter, whereas Ashtabula is a little more diversified in terms of the reduction of the coal itself too. That I think is going to increase the amount of aggregates that are coming in to Ashtabula.
Patrick, can you flip back to that slide? Yeah, this slide here. So one thing I want to point out is this large circle for Cleveland. In 15, it was about 14 million tons. If any of you are familiar with the Cleveland port, one of the limitations that they have is physical, right? They're located downtown next to the Cleveland Browns Stadium, and their ability to grow, moving on them by the land uses that are developed around them. I think that creates an opportunity, and we've engaged in multiple discussions with the Cleveland Port to say, listen, you're going to become constrained at some point, and you need partners. And one of the opportunities I think we have, because we're connected by rail, because we're connected by truck with them very well, is to help divert some cargo and become part of their regional system, where we're moving some of the cargo that they can't handle, or they don't want to handle within the downtown area because it's difficult to move in and out, whether that's large project cargo or any number of different things, containerized cargo that they're looking at now, to divert some of that and develop that out of our local ports, because we have the capability to do that. We have the physical infrastructure to support that type of development. So giving you a taste of sort of, the longer term strategy that we're looking at in terms of leveraging these assets that we have. The other thing I want to point out, and Patrick mentioned that, he mentioned products like polyethylene pellets, liquid that's developed out of, ethylenes, polyethylenes that are developed out of the Utica and Marcellus shale. Right now, Shell's putting in one of the largest cracker, a multi-billion-dollar cracker plant that will come online. I think it's scheduled for 22, which will be developing product here within the region. Well, we're connected into that region, into southwestern Pennsylvania and southern Ohio by rail connection. We have the ability to, if you look at some of these product movements, unloaded international or moving out, we have the ability to connect through that multimodal play that I was talking about, where we could move things from rail onto ship, and we're connected to the European marketplace. So I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity for us to look at diversifying and growing our piece of that pie, because I think the overall piece of the pie is going to grow regionally based on some of the products that Patrick had talked about.
Yeah, and Craig brought up a couple of points there, and as a relief valve for Cleveland is actually a pretty good idea. Cleveland, there's a lot of competition for its waterfront land, and through residential condos, through parks, and people want to reclaim the waterfront closer to Cleveland, and it is constraining their port capabilities. I think they have quite a bit of capacity yet, but now you're talking about the social side of things, that there's going to be pushback from the community itself, because if they utilize the Port of Cleveland a little bit more, access to and from that port is being built up by retail, residential, a lot of other uses, and so the community itself might be the constraining factor for Cleveland.
Right, so we want to make sure we encourage a lot of that non-industrial development at the port, right? Encourage housing, encourage retail down there, right? Get behind those things, because it only continues to help us.
Yeah, and and Greg also brought up international commerce. We're currently doing a study for the Great Lakes Council of Governors and Premiers for St. Lawrence Seaway utilization for trade to Antwerp. And nobody had ever looked at this before, but apparently and I'm not part of that project, but I'll look into it. One of the guys that's working on this job is involved with that. But apparently there is a lot of market demand for trade between the Great Lakes region and Antwerp, Belgium. Who knew? And we have to look into what those commodities actually are. But international trade, obviously, exports are better than imports. So if you have, liquefied or a natural gas liquefaction plant, you pump it into a port, into a ship at the port, and you ship that off to Antwerp, and then you have clean fuel in Antwerp, Belgium. There's going to be a cyclical demand for that product.
And one of the things, and a lot of you have heard, you've read the paper, you've heard me talk quite a bit about the Petman project that's going on the dock in Ashtabula. As it stands now, I think we're projecting about a third of their finished goods are going to be shipped internationally which is fantastic for us because now we're establishing that European connection. We're establishing that waterborne route and connection back into that market that I'm hoping that we can continue to build on. The other thing that project has done is highlighted the importance of a lot of the other resources that tie in and continue to build on the system, and that's, the county airport. As they continue to grow and they're bringing people in, they can utilize that for private jet movements. We can also use that, and I think the airport has some good examples of where they've used that for emergency cargo movements for companies locally. But that all fits into the story that we're trying to tell when we're working not only with local companies about saying, hey, we've got resources that I think we can leverage differently, but also helps on that story for us when we're doing business attraction. We're starting to run 5 minutes after 9. I know we're getting close. I don't mind. I don't want to get there. Patrick, are there other slides that you want to go through? And I apologize. I got us off track here.
No worries. I don't think so.
The puns are certainly intended. So
these were just to help tell a story. So I think we're in pretty good shape. This is just sort of a. What we did was we overlaid the commodities within the Ohio maritime system. These are Great Lakes commodities based on the Ohio maritime system strategic plan. So the sectors, the industrial sectors overlaid with the commodities themselves, just kind of shows what the opportunities might be based on maritime cargo. And again, this is historic Lake Erie cargo, just a bunch of statistics. It's important to note that we have been talking about international movements. 60% of the tons are between Great Lakes ports. So it's not necessarily, like something going in and going out. It's an internal system as well. So whenever we're looking for partnerships, whether it be in Europe, South America, whatever it might be, we also need to look at our partners, to the north as well as to our partners to the west. States to the west as well as provinces.
Great. I think with that, we'll open it up to any questions that were asked as we were going along. Any thoughts, comments, questions?
I would make a comment on export. The real advantage, not from the job economy, but the real advantage is we were supplying today, and one of the advantages we have in this county is your airport, because today with supply demand, the way they do just in time, if you're making prototypes today or you shut down the Toyota line in Kentucky, which unfortunately we did, an airplane really comes in handy to get your product out. And I would suggest that if you're a small manufacturer, sell that as a point, because if you can supply something that no truck can supply, no railroad can supply because it will be there by midnight for the start of the shift, you've got a real advantage. And I think the airports today are getting more of that business because it's daily shipments today. And a lot of it can't be supplied by landlines. Thanks.
Thanks.
Question here?
Has the maritime shipping season lengthened because of weather?
I'm not an expert on that, so take this, comment with a grain of salt. I think, we're seeing just based on fewer days of ice coverage, I think it's starting to lengthen a little bit, but I don't have, hard facts around that. It's more anecdotal from talking to folks in that industry that it does sound like the number of shipping days is lengthening around that. And there, for us, it's a matter of being able to, and we've got experts here, so, jump in, and let us know your thoughts on that. But I think it's starting to lengthen a little bit. But from an
domestic shipping, all the contracts are signed at the beginning of the year, and as long as they're fulfilling those contracts, you know, a lot of the ships, domestic ships, U.S. flag boats are laying up pretty much on schedule, regardless of ice cover. The international shipping is dictated by the canal, and when they close, I have seen them staying open a little bit later each year, you know, for last minute ships that are in here trying to get grain and that sort of thing. And some ships will actually pay the canal to stay open a little bit later, but typically the canal closes right around Christmas.
Yeah, and I think that's the point that we're seeing is as long as you're able to fulfill the contract in terms of the movements, whether you're stockpiling enough inventory to get you through that downtime, as long as you're fulfilling that agreement to make sure that you can get that supply to them. Weather hasn't been a factor in our ability to compete, in my opinion.
I have seen more ships operating through the winter. I've personally operated through the winter for, you know, the last 5 years, just running through ice. And apparently there's new U.S. flag icebreakers coming online in the next couple of years to try to help increase that in the Great Lakes. And there's also international ships staying in the Great Lakes. They get locked in by the canal system, and they operate through the winter as much as they can, as long as there's icebreakers available.
Right. Great, thank you. Any other comments, thoughts?
I do have one quick question. As we talk about the precision, you know, trail or train and railroad, as it relates to the Ashtabula County residents, you know, has there been any type of discussion as these trains are increasing in length to look at, you know, where some of the blockages, I think of Route 45, for example, on the north tracks, you know, it seems that with the increase in train size, the citizens immediately notice that change because now it's blocking a major, you know, roadway. Has Ashtabula County looked at this, and will this be a continued constraint in the future, maybe, as you look in the railroad industry?
Yeah, well, I think you've got the right person in the room to ask that question.
That was like
because
that was a softball.
That Patrick is doing with the Ohio Rail Development Commission, I think, is on that very issue, right?
It is. That was a softball question. I'm not sure it was planned. There are two things going on at the state level. The Ohio's Research Initiative for Locals, ORIL, is doing a study on the legal aspects of who owns a grade crossing. We're actually doing that for them. Another job that we're working on is for the Ohio Rail Development Commission, and we are developing a method for them to be able to evaluate exactly what it is you're saying. The redundancy of crossings. They're calling it an adaptive capacity of a rail corridor. So if you have an occupied crossing, and they're calling it occupied, not blocked, because it could be occupied by various entities. And I don't know, you probably know Matt Dietrich, he's very political. So what we're doing is we're developing a method in order to evaluate that corridor, which is going to include its resiliency, its adaptability, safety, of course, and there's another one I can't remember. But if you have a long train, how long does it take, first of all, for that train to get through those rail grade crossings? And secondly, if it's sitting there for a long time, what is a driver's route to get around it, and how long does that take? It's going to become more of an issue for sure. And if residents have a problem, they have a number of different outlets. They can call the PUCO, they can call Federal Railroad Administration, they can call the railroad themselves, and all of those calls actually get logged. So we're looking through the logs right now in order to determine exactly what it is people are saying about these various corridors.
Can I have a real quickly?
Yeah.
So hello everybody, Erin Burrell from Dave Joyce's office. To kind of elaborate on that comment and the safety aspect of it. So the congressman, my counterpart Katie Berger, which I'm sure many of you know, kind of headed a solution committee, I guess, with the congressman and many of the railroads. So there is safety protocols set in place, and then with that, it would kind of branch out into everyday life. So that's kind of on the congressional side of things, there are safety protocols already set, so if it does kind of extend, know that the safety aspect of it has been addressed, and then all the fire departments and police departments are all aware of that. So I just wanted to kind of add on to that.
Yeah, and to build on that, emergency services and their ability to get around block crossings as well is part of our mandate as part of that job. And as far as the safety goes, there is a measure of safety that the Rail Development Commission does look at. It's called the Hazard Index. PUCO developed it, and it trickles down. So if there's a question by a local community about how safe a rail corridor is, or a specific crossing, you can call up ORDC or PUCO, and they'll let you know, how it ranks. Basically, its priority, how it compares to others.
Great. Any last final questions, comments, thoughts before we wrap things up and we get you on here as quickly as we can? But happy to stay and answer questions, Bob, afterwards if you want to stick around. No last thoughts or comments? Then let's